Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Menqi Ji. In 2012, Menqi Ji, a Chinese citizen, enrolled at the University of Missouri, Columbia, USA, where she earned a master's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering. One of her professors was impressed by her expertise and offered her a job at biomaterials company. While working there, Menqi met her future husband, Joe Elledge, in September 2015, as he was pursuing his engineering studies. They both worked at the same company, where Menqi was Joe's boss. Their feelings for each other grew quickly, and just a year and 7 months after their first meeting, Joe proposed to Menqi on September 22, 2017, on a trail at Rock Bridge Memorial State Park, called the Devil's Refrigerator. They got married only 2 weeks later. Menqi's parents think they rushed into marriage due to the impending expiration of Menqi's visa. They felt that American citizens couldn't fully grasp the difficulty that immigrants face. Although Menqi is financially independent, but she still has difficulty obtaining citizenship. After nearly 5 months, Menqi received a promotion at work. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. Menqi and Joe decided that she should decline the promotion and leave her job to focus entirely on motherhood, even though she was the primary breadwinner for their family at that time. Their income decreased significantly, but it was sufficient for their essential needs. In October 2018, Joe and Menqi's family gave birth to their first daughter. However, after her birth, Menqi and Joe began to face difficulties. Although their marriage appeared normal to outsiders, only Menqi's parents were aware of the reality. After quitting her job, Menqi felt completely isolated. She doesn't communicate with anyone. Her small child became her only companion, along with daily phone calls from her mother. Traditionally, Menqi's parents had to travel from China to the United States before she gave birth, to help care for and support her. They lived in a separate house nearby and visited Menqi daily, but their appearance increased tension between Menqi and her husband, Joe. On October 9, 2019, a year after Menqi's daughter was born, Menqi's parents were alarmed when they didn't receive a call from her. Unable to reach her, they sent a family friend who lived close by to check on Menqi. When the friend arrived, Joe answered the door and revealed that Menqi was missing. He shared a troubling account. On the evening of October 8, he had tried to give Menqi a massage and flirt with her, but she rejected him, saying she needed sleep because she had important plans for the next day. Joe stated that he woke up the next morning to find Menqi gone. She had left behind her car keys, mobile phone, wallet, and, most importantly, did not take their daughter with her. Despite her absence, Joe did not immediately report her missing, believing she was simply out for a walk and would return. A family friend attempted to call Menqi but was unsuccessful. Eventually, under pressure, Joe reported her disappearance to the police, but rather than calling 911, he reached out to the non-emergency number 311. Menqi's parents were unaware of this and were convinced the police were actively searching for their daughter. On October 15, 2019, a week after Menqi went missing, her husband, Joe Elledge, reported her disappearance to the Columbia, Missouri Police Department. He recounted to detectives the same information he had shared with a family friend. Joe described Menqi as appearing stressed the night before she went missing. He mentioned that she went to bed after telling him she had important matters to attend to the next morning. When he asked her 3 times who she was meeting, she did not provide clear answers. He suspected she might be having an affair and secretly meeting another man. Later that day, Joe informed investigators that he had discovered notes on Menqi's computer discussing an affair. Joe said Menqi texted a man from China. The message ended with her expressing sadness that her husband was not interested in her. Joe speculated that Menqi might have left him for this man, potentially abandoning their daughter for a new life. He expressed his love for their daughter and his desire for Menqi to return home safely. From the outset, investigators were skeptical of Joe's account and considered him a suspect. Joe's family hired a lawyer, who revealed that Menchi and the man China with had intimate and emotional conversations via text messages. The main question is whether Menchi went to see the man who lives in China, and where she is now. The police found out that Joe, upon realizing his wife was missing, did not call 911, but instead contacted 311. This made them even more suspicious of him. He willingly returned to the Columbia Police Department for further questioning. Investigators grew increasingly suspicious of his account, particularly when Joe mentioned taking long drives to find new walking spots instead of searching for his missing wife. Additionally, it was noted that Joe closed the door before leaving their apartment. It seemed like Joe didn't care how Menchi got home, especially since her phone keys were left behind. Menchi didn't drive the car. Detectives had suspicions, but they found no evidence to prove Joe was involved in his wife's disappearance, no blood, weapons, witnesses, or body. Furthermore, there was no indication that Menchi ran away to meet another man in China. They also confirmed that Menchi had not booked any flights. From the start, it was clear that Menchi would never have abandoned her beloved daughter. Menchi's parents refused to accept this hypothesis and insisted that she was a loving mother. When detectives spoke with Joe, they asked for his phone number, which he willingly provided. Inside his phone, investigators discovered something alarming: over 10 hours of secretly recorded conversations with his wife, in which Joe expressed his dissatisfaction with their marriage and his desire for a divorce. He also discussed plans to send his wife back to China. However, this discovery was minor compared to the nearly 4.5 hours of recordings found on Menchi's phone. In these conversations, the true nature of Joe emerged. He threatened his wife, referred to himself as God, and demanded that her parents stay away from their home. It was chilling. The Joe family's issues started a few weeks before Menchi gave birth. Her parents traveled from China to support their daughter, following a tradition where grandparents help with the baby for 100 days. This custom bothered Joe immensely, as he had a strong dislike for Menchi's parents. What really angered Joe was that Menchi tried to fight him back, and she said that she needed her parents. She loved them very much and needed their help taking care of the newborn. When Menchi had just given birth, the relationship between her and her husband became very tense, and they argued a lot. Menchi's mother mentioned that Joe disliked it when Menchi spoke Chinese around him because he barely understood the language. Joe interpreted everything they said as hurtful and negative towards him. Eventually, when Menchi's father could no longer tolerate the situation and returned to China, Joe felt relieved and seeing it as his personal victory. Now, he only had to manage his mother-in-law and reassert his authority in the home. Menchi's mother made Chinese dumplings for Joe's birthday, but he didn't like the way she used the cutting board. This sparked a heated argument between Joe and her. Joe angrily demanded that she leave his house for good. Menchi's mother, who believed in maintaining harmony because of her Confucian values, chose not to confront Joe and did not defend herself against his harsh words. Menchi pleaded with Joe to allow her mother to stay because she needed her mother's support, but Joe only replied with insults and foul language. Joe told Menchi was incompetent solely because she was a woman. Joe attempted to manipulate and control her. He even threatened Menchi's mother, claiming he would harm her. This left Menchi's mother in shock. She didn't understand why Joe was so angry with both her and Menchi. Feeling helpless, Menchi sought help from Joe's mother, who quickly lost her temper and drove 2 hours to address the family conflict. However, even with his mother present, Joe couldn't hide his disdain for his mother-in-law. He demanded that she kneel and bow to him. Although Joe eventually apologized to her, he still insisted that she leave before the 100-day mark. Consequently, Menchi's mother returned to China. In October 2019, Menchi disappeared. Detectives believed that serious family conflicts made her feel trapped, especially regarding her immigration status. Just 5 months prior, she had to attend another interview to apply for citizenship. 2 weeks after Minchi's disappearance, the Columbia Police Department opened a criminal investigation into the case. On the same day, 16 days after she went missing, police arrested Joe Elledge on suspicion of child abuse. Joe confessed to physically abusing his 1-year-old daughter, claiming it was a form of discipline. Before Minchi went missing, she told her mother that she had seen bruises on her daughter and suspected Joe was the cause. Her mother advised her to report Joe to the police, but Minchi never had the opportunity to do so. Joe's lawyer claimed this was merely an attempt to get Joe imprisoned. He argued that Joe made a mistake, emphasizing that he is a young single father who might have erred. Joe was released on bail, while his mother assisted him and cared for her granddaughter. Meanwhile, detectives continued to gather evidence against Joe, convinced that he was involved in Minchi's disappearance. On October 25, 2019, police obtained a search warrant and entered the apartment. Joe had been missing for just over 2 weeks. During the search, they collected Minchi's backpack and notes that Joe had written to help himself prepare for questions from reporters and investigators. Detectives thoroughly searched the apartment for any evidence and, following a hunch, they also took a pair of dirty boots for examination, but they found nothing significant. On the same day, Joe Elledge was arrested on suspicion of child abuse after fresh bruises were discovered on the girl's body. Meanwhile, the search for Minchi has become a search for her remains, because no one believes she is still alive. Detectives carefully tracked all movements of Joe's car and phone. However, every lead they followed led to dead ends in this complex case. As a result, the detective made the decision to charge Joe Elledge with first-degree murder, even without a body. These charges were filed while Joe was still in jail on child abuse allegations. Meanwhile, detectives continued their efforts to locate Minchi. Phone records indicated that Joe was away for 30 minutes on the day he reported her missing, a fact he did not share with investigators. When the detectives searched that location, they found nothing. After months of searching, the police were still unable to find Minchi. Her mother traveled to the United States to help with the search, convinced that her daughter's body was nearby. Over the following months, the police conducted regular searches in the area, and Minchi's mother held a memorial by the river. A year later, while Joe was still awaiting his trial, a tourist was walking in the park where Joe had proposed to Minchi. He noticed something shiny in the mud and discovered it was a wallet. Upon closer inspection, he saw a pair of shoes and then what looked like a human skull. He immediately contacted the police. Upon investigation, it was confirmed that the remains were those of Minchi. Her parents learned that their daughter had died, but the circumstances surrounding her death were still unclear. Much time had passed, and even forensic experts could not determine the cause of death. They found unnatural damage to her bones, including 4 broken ribs, indicating she had suffered a strong blow to the back. Detectives began to piece together a theory about what happened to Minchi, focusing on the evidence collected after her disappearance. They noted that Joe's cell phone records indicated he was near the location where Minchi was found on the day he reported her missing. On the day Minchi disappeared, it had been raining. Key evidence included Joe's dirty boots. The dirt and gravel on the soles, along with foliage, were sent to the Missouri Botanical Garden for analysis. The lab carefully removed juniper tree needles from the boots for DNA testing. A lab worker then climbed nearby juniper trees, numbered each, and collected fresh needles from the highest branches. These samples were preserved and compared with the needles found on Joe's shoes, revealing a DNA match. On November 1, 2021, Joe Elledge's trial for the murder of his wife, Minchi, began. with compelling evidence that Joe was present at the scene where Minchi's body was discovered on the day she went missing, including DNA from the trees and geolocation data. However, his lawyer presented a new narrative. The lawyer claimed that Joe did kill his wife, but insisted it was a tragic accident. Due to evidence from the juniper tree and its DNA, Joe could no longer assert that Minchi had run away. He had to confess that he buried her in a shallow grave. Joe stated that he was aware of his wife's communication with a man from China, and they had an argument that night. Feeling upset and hurt, he wanted to take their daughter for a walk. Minchi rushed towards him, intending to take the child, but Joe pushed her away. She fell against the table, injured her ribs, and lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, she went to bed. In the morning, when the child started crying, Minchi did not wake up. Joe then realized she had passed away in her sleep. He claimed that his wife had attacked him first and that he was only defending himself, asserting it was self-defense. However, this explanation seemed highly questionable. Joe was twice the size of his wife, making it unlikely that she could have attacked him, and after sustaining such a severe injury, she would not have been able to get up and walk to the bed. The prosecutor argued that the evidence, particularly the 4 broken ribs, suggested Joe's account was fabricated. This injury indicated she had suffered a brutal beating. The prosecutor alleged that it was premeditated murder driven by months of escalating anger. Joe harbored hatred for his wife. In court, the prosecutor presented secret audio recordings between the couple to reveal the true dynamics of their relationship. These recordings helped clarify the motive behind the crime. No evidence of Minchi communicating with other men was ever found. On November 11, 2021, after nearly 7 hours of discussion, the jury reached a verdict. They found Joe Elledge guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Minchi and Joe's daughter currently lives with Joe's mother, but Minchi's parents are pursuing joint custody of their 4-year-old granddaughter. Joe's lawyer argues that while the child will always have a relationship with her Chinese grandparents, she should stay in the care of Joe's mother for her safety. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Richard Beasley. Richard Beasley, born in 1959, was from Akron, Ohio. He was mainly raised by his mother, who worked as an office worker. After finishing school, Richard became a mechanic. He had a criminal history that included a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for burglary, followed by 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio under a new identity and tried to create a positive image by pretending to be a pastor and attending church regularly. During this time, he developed a drug addiction. Eventually, after being involved in a car accident, he stopped working and lost his source of income. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone Richard knew from the motorcycle network. Richard decided to mentor Brogan, discussing the value of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his moral conversations, Richard was actually living a double life. He had found an apartment near the road, where he sought search for girls in need, homeless people, and drug addicts for trafficking. The police eventually discovered his actions, forcing Richard to change his identity once more. As a result, he shifted his focus to exploit homeless and unemployed individuals, intending to steal their money and personal information. Noble County, located in southeastern Ohio, is a sparsely populated area characterized by vast, deserted forests. It was here that Scott Davis, a 48-year-old man, relocated from South Carolina after having worked in the state for about 15 years. To seeking better opportunities, Scott made the move to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. Scott came across a job posting on Craigslist that caught his attention. The job description read, "Simply care for a 688-acre property and raise cattle." The position pays $1,300 a week and have the opportunity to live a beautiful 2-bedroom mobile home. Although older and single individuals are preferred, but all qualified individuals will be considered. This is a short-term opportunity, so call now to apply. The benefits highlighted in the listing appealed to Scott, who was desperate for a job, and he decided to contact the employer early. After Scott heard back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the job ad, he was quickly accepted for the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta. At the restaurant, Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi, who both appeared to be genuine farmers. Their trustworthy appearance made Scott feel at ease. Then, Richard conducted an initial interview and asked Scott to join him in the car to visit the job site. They drove to a remote forest area with no cell phone reception. Suddenly, Richard said to Brogan, who was driving, that "Can they stop here? He need to grab some equipment for the farm, near where they had shot the deer last time." After that, Richard and Scott got out of the car. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest, with Richard following behind Scott. As they walked, Scott heard a clicking sound behind him, followed by some mumbling. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood he was the target next in line. Just as Richard was about to pull the trigger, Scott swiftly pushed the gun away, and the bullet struck his elbow instead. Scott then took off running, and Richard chased him, gunfire ringing in his ears, with bullets whizzing past and the sound of breaking trees and branches behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the barrel of the revolver aimed at him. Stunned and terrified, he froze momentarily before he sprinted away. Scott was lost and unfamiliar with his surroundings, but that didn't matter to him. All that mattered was making his escape. Richard, the gunman, shot at him as he fled, hitting him in the arm and making him fall. Just as Richard was about to take another shot, Scott, despite his injury, got back on his feet and ran, with blood pouring from his wounded arm. Hoping to escape the gunfire, Scott hurried to his right and slipped between two large trees. He started descending a small, slippery slope, almost losing his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. As he slid down, he flailed his arms to keep his balance, unaware of the pain from his gunshot wound. He knew he couldn't afford to fall. If he did, his chances of survival would vanish. Then, he began to run once more. He heard the gunfire of the revolver right behind him for the second time. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away, causing a rush of air. "Oh God, he's not going to let me live," he thought again. Scott took refuge in a thicket of brambles and underbrush, ignoring the thorns and hooks that tore at his skin, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His only focus was to escape the maniac with the gun, Richard. Another gunshot echoed, startling him and led him to run even faster. His heart raced, his ears buzzed from the noise. And he shook from the sweat that drenched him. When Scott finally broke free from the thick undergrowth, he paused briefly. He felt disoriented, unsure of his next steps. All around him was dense vegetation, trees, bushes, and bare branches, and the murderer was still pursuing him. He could hear the sounds of someone crashing through the brush he had just escaped, and he realized he couldn't afford to stop. He needed to continue running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard his attacker getting closer, followed by the sound of a gunshot. He realized he was nearing his end, and the thought filled him with dread. He sprinted faster, but stumbled and fell, sweat stinging his eyes and obscuring his vision. His head spun, and all he could hear was a deafening ringing in his ears. Then, he struggled to keep running. His heart raced as if it would explode from his chest, and he finally stopped. He spotted a small ditch surrounded by thick plants and scattered fallen branches. He quickly ducked behind a large tree, straining to listen for the gunman. Scott could sense the fear radiating from himself as he groaned softly. He noticed that his arm was bleeding heavily, yet he didn't feel any pain at that moment. As his heartbeat began to stabilize, his hearing returned to normal. He could hear dogs barking in the distance and crows cawing from nearby trees. He listened carefully, hoping to detect if anyone was following or searching for him, but the forest was unusually quiet. Hiding there, he felt a mix of shock, pain, and trembling fear. Eventually, he became convinced that he had escaped his attacker, and he felt immense relief. Even after he was certain the murderer was Leave, Scott needed 7 more hours to feel safe enough to seek help. When he found the chance to escape, he located a house and called the police. Noble County detectives arrived about 15 minutes later, and Scott told the officer everything, tell about Richard and the chase. Remarkably, he survived an 8-hour pursuit. Unfortunately, not all victims were as fortunate. Scott wasn't the first person to respond to that job posting. In fact, hundreds of people had applied and been accepted over the months before Scott's incident. After Scott escaped a life-threatening situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he had met Richard and Brogan. However, they faced a setback. A fire in the surveillance room the night before had damaged the recordings, making recovery difficult and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the media reported on a man who posted fake job ads on Craigslist to lure victims into the woods, where he killed them. The shocking story has garnered widespread attention of many. In August 2011, 56-year-old Ralph Geiger was experiencing a difficult period in his life. He was unemployed and living in a homeless shelter in Akron, Ohio. After losing his job, he faced significant challenges. Ralph had graduated high school in the 1970s and moved to California, where he worked with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and successfully started his own business, where he was able to hire employees and make a living by renovating homes and taking on various jobs. However, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he could no longer afford his rent, leading to his move into a homeless shelter. He lost his apartment and faced many hardships. Ralph was a lifelong bachelor, which meant he didn't have to worry about supporting a wife and children. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who is 26 and considers him like a father, often mentioned this about him. They developed a strong bond after he hired her to help clean his house many years ago. Ralph was known for his willingness to assist friends. In the summer of 2011, he visited the library every day to search for job opportunities. By the end of July, he excitedly told Summer he had landed a great job managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job not only provided him with a free mobile home but also a salary of $300 a week. Summer was thrilled for Ralph, believing he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph was happy and saw the job as an opportunity to regain his independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and said him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without hearing from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to reach him multiple times on his mobile phone, but each time, she only got his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. When she called the number again, someone else answered, indicating that Ralph's number had been reassigned. Despite her worries about Ralph, Summer chose not to report him missing, as she wasn't certain he was actually gone. Ralph had disappeared in the past but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case. involving 51-year-old David Pauly, who have had a hard time in recent years. His divorce 2 years earlier had left him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting over in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After the divorce, David found comfort in using the computer and often browsed the web. One night in October 2011, he came across a Craigslist ad that piqued his interest. He discovered a job advertisement in the Help Wanted section for a farm caretaker position on a 688-acre farm located in rural Ohio. The job pays $1,300 a week and includes free use of a trailer on the property. Curious and excited about this opportunity, David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, thought that taking a break from the city would be a significant change. Rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, felt like a promising option for the change he desired. The fact that he would have a free place to stay would also help him save money. David decided to respond to the advertisement and soon received a reply. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, frequently communicated with him. On October 22, 2011, she received a call from him while he was staying Red Roof Inn, Parkersburg, West Virginia, on his way to Ohio. David was very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He spoke about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life there. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David talked for a bit, with Deborah wishing her younger brother good luck and reminding him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, they had no idea it would be their last conversation. David's sister, unable to reach him for some time, saw news reports and contacted the police. They quickly realized that David was yet another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest where Richard had tried to murder Scott. After searching for 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and nearby, they discovered a grave that had been dug in advance for Scott. A K-9 unit was called in, and soon after, they noticed something unusual. They uncovered another body buried in the damp soil, which had been shot in the back of the head. This body was identified as David Pauly. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave containing an unidentified body. The sheriff's office in Noble County requested assistance from the FBI to track down the person who had posted a job advertisement related to the case. They needed the FBI to trace the poster using the IP address and the details of the advertisement. It became apparent that the advertiser was searching for a particular individual, someone who could vanish without attracting much attention or concern. During the interview, Richard would not hire applicants mentioned they were married or had combat or martial arts skills. He was specifically seeking older men for the position. Additionally, he completely ignored responses from women who applied. The candidates who met his criteria were Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis. Another suitable applicant was Timothy Kern, who is 47 years old. Timothy Kern was a divorced father and living away from his 3 sons. To take a job in Ohio, he had to leave his children at home. He responded to a job advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after an incident involving Scott Davis. On November 12th, Timothy visited his sons to say goodbye before moving to Ohio. After he left, there was no further communication from him, which triggered the start of an investigation into his disappearance. About 2 weeks later, the FBI found that the IP address of the person who posted the advertisement was linked to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. He claimed he had not posted any ads on Craigslist and did not know anyone named Richard, but he did mention that a man had rented a room in his house. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner and recognized a man named Richard Beasley, who is a local from Noble. When Joe viewed the footage, he identified the man, but Richard had previously introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. Police had no idea they had found Ralph Geiger, Richard Beasley's first victim, buried in an unmarked grave. They also found Brogan Rafferty, Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken into custody. Brogan agreed to share all the details of Richard's actions and to testify in court in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was also present when Richard brought Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, where Richard later lured David and Scott. Brogan wrote a report of the incident and said that they led Ralph into the woods on a hot summer night. He recalled hearing a loud noise and then going back to the car to get a shovel. When he returned, Ralph was still there, and Richard had thrown Ralph's clothes into a trash bag along with some personal belongings. Brogan also described digging a hole that was waist-high and probably about 4 feet wide. They struggled to place Ralph's body in it and sprinkled lime over him as a baptismal ritual. After Richard stole Ralph Geiger's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He then found a job and took pleasure in his actions. Many victims arrived with most of their belongings in their cars, which Richard later sold. Scott Davis informed Richard that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview, and Richard was excited about that. The last victim of Richard was Timothy Kern. At 47 years old, he faced similar job struggles as the other victims. While looking for a new job, he found a promising opportunity that required him to relocate. However, Timothy was reluctant to move away from his children. Since his divorce in 1997, he had remained close to his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. He was not only a dedicated father but also an enthusiastic baseball coach, always making time for his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their relationships through social media, especially Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about a unique job opportunity managing a 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing that covered rent and utilities, and a generous weekly salary. His only worry was the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was concerned about being away from his family, the job was too great. He planned to move on Sunday, feeling a sense of regret about leaving his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He cherished the time he spent with his sons before departing the next morning. One of his sons received a message from he, expressing his love, but no one realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different site behind an abandoned shopping center in a can. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were not initially aware of Richard's address, but they eventually apprehended him. Unbeknownst to Richard, Joe, his landlord, had talked to the police, which led them to track Richard's IP address. As a result, Richard contacted Joe both by phone and through messages, which allowed the police to locate him. Richard was arrested on November 16, just 3 days after he killed Timothy. He faced charges for the murders of Ralph, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with various other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty were put on trial in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan was offered a plea deal in which he would receive leniency if he provided information about Richard Beasley. However, he decided to reject the offer. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of aggravated murder. Even though Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to deny Richard's involvement when the key witness and one of the victims, Scott, agreed to testify. There was also a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including the victim's personal belongings and identification found at Richard's home. Although he tried to deny it, all the evidence proved him guilty. Richard's trial took place later that year, and he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Police Court for resentencing, but the verdict did not change. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard participated in his sentencing via video link from the Chilo Correctional Institution. He was seated in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks. Richard's attorney argued against imposing multiple consecutive sentences on someone who was already facing the death penalty, suggesting it was unnecessary. However, Summit County Prosecutor Jacket Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should stay the same. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common Court supported the prosecutor's stance, stating that imposing multiple consecutive sentences was necessary to accurately represent Richard's criminal behavior. During the trial, Richard asked if he could get back a Celtic cross that had been seized during the investigation. He explained that the necklace had been in his family for generations and he wanted to give it to his newly married daughter. He insisted it was not related to the case, and it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It's striking that a man convicted of murdering many innocent people would present himself as a loving father. This raises questions about whether his behavior towards his daughter was truly genuine or simply a strategy to appear compassionate to the jury. Richard's mother was there, convinced of his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, Scott, and the confession of his accomplice who testified in court, Richard had to accept the consequences of his actions. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother did not speak further. Richard appealed the verdict but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has continuously claimed he is innocent, but no one believes him. He is currently at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard was close to evading capture, but his gun jammed, giving Scott the chance to escape. If Scott hadn't escaped and reported the incident, the serial killer in the woods might not have been discovered, leading to more victims. The situation began with an online job ad that the victims accepted without question. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Hannah Anderson. The Anderson family was a classic American household. Parents Christina and Brett worked hard to give their children, Ethan and Hannah, a comfortable life. Ethan enjoyed activities like fishing and racing video games with his friends, while Hannah, 16 years old, was into dancing, social media, and cheerleading. Like many teenagers, Hannah was carefree and unaware of the world's dangers, never imagining that harm could come to her or her family. However, their lives are about to face a tragic incident, as a sinister person was secretly watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Christina had a short marriage before meeting Brett. After her first marriage ended, she was lively and energetic, enjoying dance and fitness. She loved trying new things and was looking for someone special to share her adventures with. Brett was smart, hardworking, friendly, and kind, and the two quickly connected. Their friendship soon turned into romance. At the time they got married, Brett worked in the telecommunications industry. By the fall of 1996, Christina was pregnant with their first child. As the due date approached, the Andersons' three-bedroom townhouse was filled with anticipation and excitement from family and friends. On July 22, 1997, Hannah Anderson was born, instantly charming everyone with her bright blue eyes and light-colored hair. Her birth was a joyful occasion for the Andersons and their loved ones, marking an important milestone. Brett and Christina, known for hosting gatherings and barbecues, had created a close-knit group of friends and family. Brett's best friend, James Lee DiMaggio, was a significant part of the family, sharing many outdoor adventures with Brett. At first, Hannah would join her dad and Uncle James, but as she grew older, she started spending more time with her mother and friends. Ethan, on the other hand, enjoyed accompanying his dad and Uncle James on these adventures. Born on October 8, 2004, Ethan was a brave boy who loved learning about sports and fishing from his dad. During a difficult divorce, James found comfort and support in the kindness of the Andersons, who were always willing to help those in need. In 2009, he acquired a property in the Mountain Empire area of San Diego, California, about an hour from where the Anderson family lived. This is a picturesque two-story log cabin with a private three-car garage. The area was rural, with fewer than 400 residents, making it perfect for a hunting getaway. Once James had fully furnished and decorated the cabin, he invited Brett, Christina, and their children to use it as a vacation home whenever they liked. Brett was devoted to his job, often working long hours to support his family, which kept him away from home often. Similarly, Christina was busy with her job and taking care of their children, leaving little free time for other things. Meanwhile, their teenage daughter Hannah was going through a phase where she desired more independence and spent most of her time on her phone, deeply engaged in social media. Despite Brett's hectic schedule, he always made time to keep a close eye on Hannah, ensuring she avoided negative influences and stayed within his safe boundaries. Hannah's best friend was Marissa Chavez. They had a lot in common and were almost inseparable, enjoying activities like dance, cheerleading, hairstyling, fashion, makeup, and talking about boys. They loved being the center of attention. Hannah was a smart, adventurous, happy, and outgoing person who lived life without worrying. Her parents, Brett and Christina, supported her as she became more independent and pursued her interests. Hannah spent her time coaching young cheerleaders and spending quality time with her younger brother, Ethan. In 2013, Hannah was in her second year of high school in Lakeside, while her brother Ethan was attending Linda Lake Elementary School. During this time, Brett was having trouble at work and started looking for a new job. In April, he received a promising job offer, but it required him to be away from home for extended periods. After discussing this opportunity with Christina, they decided it was the best choice for the family. Brett moved to Tennessee, but promised to return home to celebrate Hannah's 16th birthday, an event he was determined not to miss. When Brett was away, Christina relied more heavily on their network of friends and family for support. Despite his own financial struggles and the possibility of losing his home, James offered to help. He even considered the possibility of moving to Texas as a solution. Brett's absence did not reduce James's involvement with the Anderson family. James often drove Hannah and Ethan to their activities and kept them entertained, essentially becoming a second father figure to them. James also welcomed Hannah and her friends into his home, providing a space for them to hang out without their parents around. James set clear rules to create a safe environment for the teenagers while Brett was away. No boys were allowed in the house, and his bedroom was off limits. Despite this, he allowed for some minor rules to be bent. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, Brett deeply missed his family and made it to call them every other day to check in on their well-being. He also remained in close contact with James, updating him on his new work challenges and relying on him to keep Christina and their children safe and supported. Christina would drop off Hannah at the cheerleading gym in the morning, where Hannah mentored younger cheerleaders. After the coaching session ended at 4 p.m., Hannah would wait outside for Christina to pick her up and take her home. Hannah was looking forward to seeing Marissa at home, who was eagerly waiting to hear from her, but unfortunately, Marissa never received a message from Hannah. At approximately 8 p.m. on a Sunday, a resident from the Mountain Empire community called the San Diego County Sheriff's Office to report a house fire. The fire had spread to both the main house and a nearby smaller structure. Despite the best efforts of the firefighting team, the flames initially difficult to control. The fire was particularly notable in the small town for its severity. The upper floor of the house had collapsed, and a gray SUV was found parked nearby. It took nearly 2 hours for the firefighters to extinguish the flames, even though the fire station was only a 3-minute drive away. Once the fire was brought under control, the firefighters conducted a thorough interior search to check if anyone was inside. While inspecting the smaller adjacent building, a firefighter noticed a strip of green tarp. Upon closer inspection, 2 legs were found protruding from the entrance of the detached garage. A body was found under a tarp, face down, with the upper part merged into the tarp, making it difficult to identify the sex at first. However, the clothing and hair suggested it was a woman. The fire had burned the area, melting the tarp to her hair, skin, and skull. There was a large amount of blood on the floor beneath the body, indicating a struggle before the fire. She had been restrained, with rope tied around her, duct tape wrapped multiple times around her mouth and neck, and her ankles bound by white plastic rope. A small brown dog was found hiding under a sleeping bag next to the woman's body. The license plate from the burned-out SUV was identified as belonging to Christina Anderson, leading to the assumption that her remains had been discovered. The medical examiner's examination revealed that Christina had suffered a severe throat injury. When the body was turned over, Brett was overcome with grief, still reeling from the news he had just received from the police, that his wife had been found dead in a violent manner. The shock was overwhelming as Brett struggled to comprehend how something so horrific could have happened to Christina, in their own garage, with no sign of their children or James. Brett felt a sense of helplessness, haunted by the fact that he was not there to protect his family when they needed him most. The discovery that their family dog, C, was also involved made the situation even more unbearable, leaving Brett to wonder how such cruelty could be inflicted on the ones he loved. When the investigation began, detectives have discovered that Christina Anderson, a 42-year-old woman, was the victim. Her 2 children, 16-year-old Hannah and 8-year-old Ethan, have all gone missing. The crime scene was at the home of James Lee DiMaggio, a close friend of the family and the owner of the house. James, 40, was also missing, along with his blue Nissan car with California license plates. As the investigation unfolded, this information caught the attention of Brett, a friend of James's. Although he didn't want to suspect his best friend, but Christina's body was discovered in James's garage, and his children, along with James, were missing, he felt compelled to act. Brett promptly boarded a flight to San Diego, ready to face the disturbing possibility that his friend might be involved. The police searched the area around James's home, talking to neighbors, and they said that saw Christina, Ethan, and the family dog going into the house the night before. This was the same night James had a party to say goodbye before his move to Texas. In California, an Amber Alert was issued, which is a national system used to quickly tell people about child abductions. News of the alert quickly spread through social media, and people in the community immediately started helping. Marissa, who was one of Hannah's closest friends, and some of their classmates, took charge of handing out flyers in the area. During a thorough investigation of James's burned-down home, fire investigators made a disturbing discovery: the severely burned body of another victim, believed to be Ethan, a child. Brett was in shock upon hearing the news, and it took time for him to come to terms with it. However, as the harsh reality of never being able to see his son again sank in, it ultimately became too overwhelming for him, and he breaking down. His only comfort was the hope that Hannah might still be alive. Having already lost his wife, son, and pet, the thought of losing his daughter too was too much to bear. If James had indeed kidnapped Hannah after what he did to Christina and Ethan, she was in extreme danger. Detectives tried to determine the whereabouts of Hannah and James by questioning everyone they knew, including friends, relatives, and associates. James had been a steady presence in Hannah's life since she was born and was like a father to her, a fact that the entire Anderson family respected. Most people believed that someone outside of their circle had caused harm and taken them, but no one had any idea who that person might be. As of August 5th, neither James nor Hannah could be found and their phones had not been used. The media published their photos and detailed descriptions, asking the public to report any sightings of them. California's alert system was functioning properly, ready to issue notifications nationwide through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. With no other potential suspects, the focus of the investigation turned to James. The discovery of several trash bags filled with new camping gear in the garage's attic space suggested he had been preparing to live in the wilderness. The seized items included a portable stove, packaging from a hunting knife, and a box of handcuffs, leading investigators to suspect that James had taken Hannah to a remote area, possibly planning to escape to Mexico or Canada. The search also uncovered other concerning items, including explosives, gasoline containers, and a tarp. Authorities also found numerous letters written by Hannah that James had saved for unknown reasons, the details of which were kept confidential. The investigation aimed to determine why James might have abducted Hannah. It was soon discovered that the fire had been intentionally set using an explosive device with detonators, indicating that the act was premeditated. James' acquaintances have confirmed that he has in the wilderness survival skills, suggesting that he may be evading capture in the wilderness with Hannah. The case gained international attention in 2013 and led to a global search for James. At a press conference, Brett directly appealed to James, asking him to release his daughter. He urged his former friend to spare Hannah's life, given that he had already lost so much. The investigation found surveillance footage from the Pine Valley checkpoint, which is near James's home. The footage showed James's vehicle with Hannah visibly sitting next to him on August 4th. This sighting occurred before the fire but after Hannah was last seen, offering some hope for her well-being. By the time James picked up Hannah from middle school at 4 p.m., their phones were already turned off. Despite this, records showed that James and Hannah had made 13 phone calls to each other beforehand. The discovery of Hannah's letters in James's attic and their shared outings sparked media speculation about a possible connection between he and Hannah. Marissa provided a significant clue to investigators, recounting a car trip in which James's behavior seemed unusual. During this trip, James shared up about his strong feelings for Hannah, suggesting that he wanted to pursue a romantic relationship with her. This story portrayed James as being intensely infatuated with Hannah. As Hannah matured and began to create some distance between them, investigators speculated that James's intense infatuation could have driven him to extreme and impulsive actions. His motivation, according to this theory, was to keep Hannah isolated from others. This motivation may have led to the arson, and possibly even to Christina's death. It's possible that Christina witnessed something between James and Hannah that made her a threat to James's unrealistic plans, ultimately leading to her tragic demise. A new break in the case occurred Wednesday, August 7th, in Idaho. On the previous day, a group of experienced outdoor enthusiasts, consisting of a 71-year-old former sheriff named Mark John, his spouse, and another couple, went on a horseback ride in the remote Boise National Forest. This area, known as the River of No Return, is notorious for its challenging terrain. During their ride, they came across two hikers, a man and a young woman, who stood out for their unusual clothing. The girl was wearing pajamas and tennis shoes, while the man wore a gray sweatshirt and sneakers. Neither hiker had any rain gear, and they had set up camp on a ridge with no access to water, indicating that they were inexperienced with hiking. This thing notable for the man's behavior, as he pulled the girl close, and their intentional avoidance of interaction with others. In addition, they see the girl was holding a cat in her arms. What those who saw them at the time didn't know was that the couple were the main character of a nationwide search. It wasn't until after they returned home and watched a news report about James and Hannah that they realized who the couple was. This prompted them to immediately contact law enforcement. The fact that the girl held a cat was a particularly significant clue, as it matched the description of James's household, where a cat had gone missing following the tragic fire a pet shared between Hannah and him. On Friday, a large group of law enforcement officers gathered in Cascade, Idaho, to search a rugged area near the River of No Return. This difficult-to-reach terrain covers a vast area with dense forests, towering mountains, and deep valleys, causing cell phone signals to be undetectable, making it an ideal place to hide. A search team consisting of state police, FBI agents, and local law enforcement thoroughly searched over 400 miles of this challenging landscape. The team discovered a blue Nissan, easily noticeable due to its missing license plates. The vehicle was quickly identified as belonging to James, despite being disguised with branches, leaves, and other natural cover. On Saturday, August 10, 2013, a U.S. Marshal Service aircraft carrying out an aerial reconnaissance mission over the forest north of McKay Lake made a significant discovery. The crew spotted a two-person blue tent and two individuals near the lake. A man was removing his shirt, while a woman stood nearby. Notably, the woman caught the pilot's attention by desperately signaling for help with a piece of fabric during the flyover. The two individuals were later identified as James and Hannah, marking a crucial turning point in the search operation. The FBI's hostage rescue team carefully positioned themselves in the area, waiting for the right moment to rescue Hannah from her captor. As the sun began to set, the team saw their chance. When James, Hannah's abductor, went into the forest to gather more firewood, the team made their move. Hannah quickly spotted and ran towards her rescuers. However, James, Hannah's captor, also saw the rescue team. He immediately fired his gun, and the team responded by returning fire. James was struck by multiple bullets and, despite attempts to save him, succumbed to his injuries. Once Hannah reached the safety of the rescue team, she seemed physically unharmed, but was visibly shocked. She clung tightly to the agents, her eyes fixed and her body trembling. The rescue team immediately flew Hannah to a nearby hospital in Idaho, where her father was waiting for her arrival. Unfortunately, before Brett arrived, the FBI shared devastating news with Hannah. Her mother and brother had not survived the fire. Hannah was now prepared to give a statement to the authorities about what happened, but without James to confirm her account, some details would remain unclear. Hannah recalled that the event started on August 3rd, when James hosted a farewell gathering at his home before leaving for Texas. Christina, Ethan, and their dog attended, but Hannah not to go. When Hannah found out that James would be picking her up instead of her mother, she felt uneasy. During the car ride, he got lost on the way to meet her, and Hannah had to call him multiple times to guide him to the correct location. Hannah initially felt at ease with James, as they shared laughter and jokes. However, upon entering his home, she noticed something odd. Her mother and younger brother were nowhere to be found, despite their belongings being scattered around. Her concern grew as she saw her mother's purse, still containing money and cards, abandoned on the floor. James's demeanor then changed drastically, and he presented Hannah with handcuffs, his eyes now empty and emotionless, as if someone or something else was controlling him. She had never seen him act this way before, and his sudden change was unnerving. James tried to reassure her that her younger mother and brother were safe, claiming they were in the garage with the dog and urging her not to worry. But after being forced to take several pills, Hannah eventually lost consciousness. Hannah woke up in James's car, surrounded by empty Red Bull cans. She soon fell asleep again, likely due to a sleeping medication. Earlier, James had threatened to retaliate if she tried to signal for help, leaving her fearful of attempting escape. Even in private moments, James kept a close watch on her while they were in the forest. Hannah found the thought of escaping nearly impossible due to the heavy rain, her inadequate clothing, and the discomfort of carrying a heavy backpack. Lacking wilderness survival skills, she felt completely hopeless and unsure of how to escape her situation. However, taking advantage of the opportunity when James was obscured by trees, she took the chance to signal for help to a passing plane from the U.S. Marshal Service. The question remains unanswered as to why Hannah was still wearing her pajamas, as it is known she was at school earlier that day. She spent several days recovering in a hospital before returning to San Diego with her father. The Anderson family struggled to protect Hannah from the invasive media attention she received. However, Brett Anderson, despite his own immense pain and loss, showed remarkable resilience. He felt comforted watching his daughter grow up and move on to a happy, fulfilling life. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Cronin. Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan lived in Essex, England. Jennifer was deeply devoted to her family and children. She was a kind, warm, and caring person who had a very attached relationship with Susan. They loved and admired each other greatly. This makes her cherish and appreciate their relationship. She grew up with a big dream, to one day having a family of her own, and children who would love and admire her just as she admired her own parents. In 1990, Susan was dating Kieran Lynch, a young bricklayer 3 years her senior. At the time, Susan was working as an apprentice hairdresser, known for her distinct style. Susan's friends were impressed by how Kieran treated her, often remarking that he seemed to adore her. Their relationship blossomed, and the couple got married in 1994. It was important to Susan that Kieran got along with her parents, which he did. In fact, Kieran quickly formed a close bond with wife's mother, Jennifer. Kieran and Susan had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were very close to their grandparents and visited them at least twice a week. As soon as they heard grandmother's, Jennifer, gentle voice, the girls would excitedly run to her. When they were young, they looked up to their father as a perfect role model, the most kind-hearted and generous man they knew. Despite his busy work schedule, Kieran made time for his daughters, using all his free time to be with them. However, there was another side to his personality. He was highly competitive and always strived to be the best in everything he did and had a desire to be in control, creating a perfect image of their family. Kieran struggled to cope with the stress of supporting his wife and 2 daughters. As a result, he often lashed out in anger, damaging things and creating chaos. Over time, his behavior worsened, especially when he had been drinking. His temper tantrums became more aggressive and intense, causing his daughters to view him in a different light. They vividly remembered the incidents when their intoxicated father would shout, criticize, and eventually turn violent, smashing plates, slamming doors, and overturning furniture. In times of turmoil, the girls would find a safe haven, hiding from their angry father until he fell asleep. They moved quietly around the house, making sure not to wake him. After these tantrums, Kieran would often feel guilty and try to make amends. He would fix the things he had broken the day before and attempt to explain why he had acted that way. He would sincerely apologize to his wife and daughters, promising that it wouldn't happen again. However, he never changed, and then the same thing happened again and again. Like many people experiencing domestic violence, Susan felt deeply ashamed and humiliated, which led her to conceal the turmoil at home from everyone. Despite trying to appear strong in front of her daughters, Susan would often break down in tears at night, confused and hurt by the transformation of her loving partner into an overbearing and controlling presence. Whenever Kieran came home in a bad mood, Susan and her daughters would make to close the windows so the neighbors wouldn't hear the loud arguments. Even the smallest thing could make Kieran's become angry. If Susan was late coming home from work, Kieran would search the town for her. When the daughters grew up, they started to stand up to their father when he was being cruel to their mother, Susan. At first, this seemed to make Kieran behave better. However, one serious incident happened when Kieran, angry, almost hit his daughter, who stepped in to protect her mother, Susan. Although the family tried to hide their problems from those around them, the truth was eventually exposed. In 2015, people close to Kieran noticed a significant change in his behavior and appearance. A friend who hadn't seen him in months was shocked, and they met unexpectedly in the city. Kieran had lost significant weight and looked gaunt. His demeanor seemed distant and contemplative. It wasn't long before the cause of these changes became clear. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder in a small tube in Kieran's work clothes that she was washing. This discovery explained Kieran's recent erratic behavior, and it filled Susan with fear. Susan confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and saying he valued them more than family. Kieran didn't make any excuses, but instead asked Susan not to discuss the matter with their daughters. When a large amounts of money started to disappear from their credit card, Susan tried to talk to Kieran about it, but he became defensive and aggressive. As a result, the home environment became increasingly tense and strained. Kieran's behavior becomes more and more scary. One time, while their daughters were away, he put a knife to Susan's throat and threatened to end both their lives. On another occasion, he set up a noose in the attic. As these frightening incidents grew more frequent, Susan realized that if she didn't act, the situation could have disastrous consequences. Despite her desire to protect her family, Susan found it hard to open up to her own mother, Jennifer, because she doesn't want her mother to be sad. However, Susan knew she had to take decisive action to change their situation. In November 2016, after 24 years of marriage, Susan and Kieran decided to separate. Kieran made the difficult decision to leave the family home and move back in with his parents. Susan understood that this was for the best, because their daughters are grown up and they should no longer endure their father's noisy arguments. Her top priority was the well-being of their children. The separation occurred with minimal conflict, and Susan was relieved, although she also felt guilty for not taking action sooner. However, it did Susan know that Kieran had no intention of giving up. After Kieran left, as the tension in the house finally dissipated, life started to get better, and for the first time in a long while, Susan felt happy again. She and her daughters were able to have normal conversations, watch movies together, laugh, and enjoy life without any stress. The worry about how Kieran would behave when he came home from work was gone. Susan realized that she was still attractive for men, and her confidence grew over time. People noticed that Kieran seemed to be moving on with his life, and Susan was glad that he had made some positive changes. Even though they were no longer together, Susan appreciated that Kieran was still a part of his children's lives. Susan had a tough time in her past relationships, so she was hesitant to get close to someone new. That was until she met Mike. As she slowly opened up to him, she shared stories about her previous, including her difficult past with her ex-husband, Kieran. To move forward, Susan knew she needed to finalize her divorce. Despite being nervous about Kieran's unpredictable behavior, she decided to take the first step by texting him to meet at a cafe to discuss their divorce. To her surprise, the encounter went smoothly. Kieran seemed to accept the idea of a divorce. And for once, they had a friendly conversation, reminiscing about their past experiences. They even exchanged kind text messages afterward, with Kieran expressing happiness for Susan's new relationship and Susan hoping he would find love soon. However, The next day, Susan received a barrage of messages from Kieran, and his attitude toward the divorce had taken a drastic turn. He now acted like he didn't care about his ex-wife, but he still had some demands. He wanted $60,000 in exchange for signing the divorce papers. Kieran argued that he had already left her the house and its contents, and therefore, he was entitled to compensation. But what worried her was Kieran's attitude in letting her move on. He couldn't stand the thought of another man replacing him. His texts even reveal a dark desire, her demise. At first, Kieran only threatened through text messages, but then he showed it through actions. He appeared in Susan's yard with a hammer, while she was home alone with her pet. Susan quickly called to request emergency assistance. By the time the police arrived, Kieran had already damaged some flower pots and outdoor decorations, but he had left the scene. 2 officers entered the property and listened to Susan's account. Kieran returned, loudly proclaiming his intent to confront his ex-wife, Susan, and said that no one could stop him. The police arrested Kieran for disturbing the peace. Even in handcuffs, he continued to insult his ex-wife. As a result, Kieran faced charges on 3 counts, making life-threatening actions, carrying a dangerous object, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, Kieran appeared in magistrate's court and denied all allegations against him. He was scheduled to appear in court again on March 29 and was released on bail under the condition that he avoid contact with Susan and stay away from her home. However, this decision left Susan and her daughters feeling uneasy and questioning the law's effectiveness in protecting them. Kieran disregarded the bail conditions and continued to contact Susan, violating the no-contact order. He repeatedly called her and even showed up at her residence, which intensified her fear for her safety. He falsely claimed to mutual friends that Susan's new boyfriend was sending him provocative messages. Kieran also targeted his daughters by contacting them, knowing they would inform Susan about his actions. Susan was on high alert at all times, worried about leaving her children alone due to Kieran's persistent calls, which sometimes exceeded 80 a day. These frequent calls often involved threats of him showing up at her location. When Kieran failed to comply with his bail conditions, Susan contacted the authorities again. During this time, Kieran made a concerning call to the emergency services and revealed that he tried to end his life but did not have the courage to do so. A team of psychologists and police officers was sent to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Kieran assured them he was fine, and as a result, he was advised to schedule an appointment with his family doctor. At the time, he did not appear to have any mental health problems. Kieran continued to harass Susan and family with calls and messages. He took invading their personal space. He snuck into the garage and cut off the power supply. He also tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's, Jennifer, house and would sometimes lurk under the windows at night. His actions caused fear in Susan, their daughters, and even her elderly mother, Jennifer. Despite Susan's repeated pleas for help, but the police were of no help to her. When they arrived, they took statements and promised to make an arrest Kieran, but they failed to do so. The police considered this a normal dispute between people going through a divorce, and they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. However, things took a darker turn when Kieran contacted his eldest daughter and made threats to sexually assault her. When Susan found out, she was horrified. The police launched a search for Kieran at his home but couldn't find him. They advised Susan and her daughters to go to a friend's house or to Jennifer's house to avoid having to stay home alone. Youngest daughter Matilda stayed at a friend's house, while the oldest daughter, Molly, went to visit her grandmother, Jennifer, who lived alone after her husband passed away. Molly and her grandmother, Jennifer, spent a peaceful evening together, watching TV, drinking tea, and chatting. For a short time, they were able to forget about Kieran's threatening behavior. However, when they went to bed, the phone started ringing. When Jennifer answered, there was complete silence on the other end, and she thought it was a wrong number. Nevertheless, the phone continued to ring repeatedly. Susan and Molly were anxious and uneasy due to the phone calls this continuous. Molly felt like someone was hiding in the garden. A shadowy figure appeared outside against the dark background. For safety, Molly locked themselves in the bathroom with Jennifer. It was around 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Susan's phone was flooding with more calls and texts, so she also contacted the police for help. Unfortunately, the police had limited resources and couldn't keep a constant watch for the person making the calls. They advised Susan to turn off her phone and make sure all doors and windows were securely locked. In the past 24 hours, the police had received 6 ask-for-help calls. However, the authorities claimed they didn't have enough personnel to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as her granddaughter left the house, Susan decided to visit her mother, Jennifer. She wanted to offer her mother comfort and reassurance, and she promised her mother that she would not stand by while her family was bullied and threatened by someone who did not accept their divorce. At 72, Jennifer stepped out into the garden with her dog, enjoying the warm daylight. From inside, her daughter Susan watched with a smile, happy to see her mother happy. Abruptly, a loud noise was heard from outside at 10:48 a.m. Kieran entered the garden with a container of flammable liquid. He yelled angry insults at his mother-in-law, Jennifer. Then he approached Jennifer, pouring the liquid on her head, face, and back. Jennifer was terrified and screamed as he continued. Susan quickly called the emergency services, asking for help. The operator told her to run out into the street to get away from Kieran, which she did right away. Susan sprinted to the end of the street and looked back, but no one was chasing her. Remembering her mother was still in the garden, she quickly turned around to return home. Just then, Kieran poured the remaining liquid on himself and lit it with a lighter. Flames erupted, engulfing he and Jennifer. Police, firefighters, and medical staff, along with an ambulance, quickly arrived at the scene. When Susan returned to her mother's garden, she was horrified by what she saw. Her mother and Kieran were badly disfigured. Her mother, Jennifer, had severe burns. Her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were completely gone. And her skin was badly charred. Despite being in agony, Jennifer made it clear to Susan how much she loved her and that Susan and her children meant everything to her. Even in her critical condition, Jennifer tried to comfort Susan, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Kieran was severely injured with burns covering his entire body. He was sitting against a wall, gasping for air and still smoldering from the fire. Susan was consumed by grief and anger, lashing out at Kieran for his actions. She was struggling to understand how the man she once married could cause so much harm to her mother, whom she loved and protected dearly, and couldn't fathom how their relationship had ended in such a tragic way. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of trying to kill Jennifer Cronin. Both Kieran and Jennifer were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. A few hours after the attack, Susan was called in for an interview to help figure out what happened. It was discovered that Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer with a flammable liquid and set them on fire in the garden. Kieran, a 50-year-old man, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, Susan. She had repeatedly informed the authorities about his aggressive behavior, which was made worse by his use of illegal drugs. However, due to a lack of police resources, the situation spiraled out of control, leading to disastrous consequences. As a result, the incident quickly gained media attention, and the lack of decisive action by law enforcement was heavily criticized. The medical team informed Susan that Kieran's condition was extremely serious, with severe burns covering almost his entire body. This devastating news affected his daughters deeply, who remembered their father as a loving and caring person. One of them wanted to visit him one last time before he passed away. However, Due to the extent of his injuries, only the tip of his nose was recognizable, and it had turned black from the burns. During this final visit, the daughter expressed her love for her father and mourned the tragic circumstances. A toxicology report later revealed that Kieran's body contained both alcohol and illicit substances. Meanwhile, Jennifer was also fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering about a third of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. Despite undergoing surgical procedures, her chances of recovery were low due to the severity of her injuries. Susan visited her mother, Jennifer, in the hospital frequently, where she saw her mother's immense suffering. As the situation seemed hopeless, Susan had come to accept that her mother's passing was near and wished for her to be with her late husband, free from pain and discomfort. Unfortunately, Susan's mother only had a short time left. After 17 days, she passed away on March 30, 2018, at 1332, with her family by her side. Although her time was almost up, her face remained peaceful. Susan held her mother's hand as she took her last breath, bringing an end to her mother's life on Earth. On January 21, 2019, an in-depth investigation began at County Hall in Chelmsford, aiming to understand the incidents that led to the deaths of Jennifer Cronin, 72, and Kieran Lynch, 50. Susan, who was deeply affected by these losses, initially felt angry towards her ex-husband, Kieran. However, the investigation showed that law enforcement did not handle the situation well, so Susan's anger shifted towards them. Although Susan was aware of Kieran's unstable behavior, she had not anticipated that it would result in harm to her family. Susan publicly expressed her dissatisfaction with the authorities' handling of their situation, criticizing the police for their inadequate response and unkept promises. Specifically, she pointed out that Kieran's failure to be held accountable for breaching his bail conditions contributed to the tragic outcome of Jennifer's life. Susan hoped that this incident would serve as a lesson to the authorities, preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. She emphasized that the police have a fundamental responsibility to protect and serve the community, a duty that she felt was severely neglected in her family's case. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Lowe. Annie Lowe was born on July 3, 1985, in San Jose, California, to Vietnamese immigrant parents Vivian Van Lowe and Hogan Lowe. She was their only child and demonstrated exceptional intelligence and talent from a young age. Annie excelled in school, particularly in chemistry and biology, and was often recognized as the top student. Teachers predicted that Annie would have a successful future in science, and even said that she might one day win a Nobel Prize. Annie regularly participated in school scientific conferences, where her work received numerous awards and prizes. In high school, Annie won a $65,000 scholarship to attend any university in the United States. She chose the University of Rochester in New York, where she studied cellular development biology and medical anthropology. Annie focused her dissertation on diseases caused by metabolic disorders and dedicated significant time to laboratory work. She made significant strides in her research, contributing to the treatment of diabetes mellitus and certain forms of cancer. During her time at the University of Rochester in New York, Annie met Jonathan Widowski, a talented student and aspiring scientist specializing in physical and mathematical sciences. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and their parents were delighted with their children's choice. Then Annie pursued a master's degree at the prestigious Yale University, simultaneously, she working in a scientific laboratory. While her partner, Jonathan, pursued science at Columbia University in New York. Although they were physically far apart, but their relationship remained strong, thanks to weekend visits and sharing plans for the future. During the summer of 2009, Jonathan proposed to Annie with a diamond ring, and she accepted happily. The couple set their wedding date for Sunday, September 13, 2009. Initially, they only shared the news with their parents, keeping it a secret from friends and colleagues. However, on September 6, just a week before the wedding, Annie sent out emails to friends and colleagues, sharing the news of their upcoming marriage and including a wedding invitation. The following day, the news became a major topic of discussion in Annie's department and lab. The couple had intended to hold their ceremony on Long Island, followed by a honeymoon at a popular Greek resort. Notably, just before that, Annie wrote an article for a university publication in which she warned students about various dangers and advised them on how to protect themselves. Annie left her university dormitory, where she lived with 3 friends, and headed to her workplace at the University Medical Center's laboratory on Amistad Street. On Tuesday, September 8, she entered the building around 10 o'clock in the morning, using her pass and special key card to gain access. CCTV footage captured her entering the building, and she was seen going straight to her office. There, she changed into work clothes, left her personal belongings behind, and put on a medical coat. She then locked her office door and went to work in the biolab. However, she never returned to her office or left the building that day. It appears that she vanished somewhere within the building's corridors, and no one saw her alive again after that. That evening, Annie's dorm neighbors were very worried and felt that something was wrong with Annie, because they saw her not returning and not answering her phone. Typically, Annie was very responsible and punctual, always returning at the same time, but as midnight approached, she was still missing. Her friends decided to report her disappearance to the police. As it turned out, Annie's parents and fiancé had also been unable to reach her that night. They initially thought she might be working late due to a heavy workload and will contact them when she is free. When the police arrived, they assumed Annie was nervous before the wedding and she might have gone somewhere to relieve her stress. However, police opinions later changed when they examined Annie's office, reviewed CCTV footage, and tracked her movements within the building using her key card. Things revealed that Annie had entered the building in the morning but never left. Her personal belongings, including clothes, bag, wallet, and cell phone, were still in the office, but she disappeared. Due to lack of concrete evidence or clues, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had to get involved. They searched for Annie and interviewed potential suspects. People close to Annie described her as intelligent, kind, cheerful, and energetic, with no known enemies. Annie's family and fiancé waited anxiously for news. They hoped that she would be found alive. However, the detectives didn't think so. When they looked at the situation, they concluded that Annie was likely no longer alive. The laboratory building was secured and treated as a crime scene. Because access was restricted to staff and students with name badges, the pool of suspects was clearly defined. The atmosphere at the university was tense, as everyone understood that a possible murderer might be among them. Jonathan was questioned by authorities. However, he had a solid alibi, having been in another state at the time of the incident. He was extremely worried about the situation and appeared to be close to having a nervous breakdown himself. One of the teachers and Annie's supervisor was initially suspected, having cancelled his lectures on the day she vanished and couldn't provide an alibi. But after further questioning, his involvement in the case was deemed unlikely. Despite this, police still believe the culprit was someone in the Yale University lab, possibly a student, faculty member, or staff. On September 12, a disturbing clue was found in a building, providing the first concrete evidence that Annie had died. A blood-stained medical coat was found, hidden under the false ceiling in an auxiliary room. Although the coat didn't belong to Annie, tests confirmed the blood was hers. This led authorities to officially declare Annie dead and reclassify the case as a murder investigation. The following day, September 13th, Annie's body was discovered on the technical floor of the laboratory. Tragically, this was the day she was supposed to marry her fiancé and leave for their honeymoon in Greece. Her remains were found in a narrow pipeline within the wall, where she had been forced headfirst. Due to her small stature, less than 150 centimeters tall, so hiding her body in this narrow space likely wasn't difficult for the perpetrator. A service dog, trained to detect the scent of decomposition, was instrumental in locating her hidden remains. The police observed that the body's placement indicated the killer was familiar with the building's layout, as it was a nearly ideal location to conceal the remains. Annie's body showed severe injuries. Most of her ribs were broken, her limbs were damaged, and several teeth were missing. However, according to the forensic report, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. In simpler terms, Annie was brutally beaten and then strangled. Subsequently, her lifeless body was placed in a pipe in the basement wall. They noted in detail was the discovery of semen traces on Annie's clothing, but further examination revealed that she had not been raped. A prime suspect emerged a few days into the investigation. Raymond J. Clark III, a young technician, had caught the attention of the police. When questioned, along with other lab employees, he claimed to have seen Annie leave the building on the evening of her disappearance without her belongings, suggesting she intended to return. However, his testimony raised suspicions. After Annie's body was discovered, Raymond became the prime suspect. The police collected a DNA sample from him and asked him not to leave the country until the investigation was concluded. On September 17th, he was arrested. The autopsy results showed that the semen on Annie's clothes was his, and his coat had traces of her blood hidden under the hanging ceiling panels. Additionally, Raymond had suspicious bruises, indicating Annie had attempted to defend herself. Despite the overwhelming evidence, but Raymond denied any involvement in the crime. However, further investigation showed that Raymond was a very hot-tempered person and often had conflicts at work. He had frequent verbal altercations with colleagues and was known to be abusive to the women he used to know. Raymond's academic record was unimpressive, but he excelled in sports. He has quite an attractive appearance and was popular among girls. Although his low grades prevented him from attending university, his relatives helped him secure a job at a laboratory. Initially, he worked as a janitor, but eventually earned a promotion to technician after a few years. During this time, Raymond dated Jessica Del Rocco. However, their relationship was troubled. Jessica later testified in court that Raymond was controlling and violent. She claimed he would check her phone, read her messages, and dictate what she wore and who she socialized with. If she disagreed with him, he would become physically abusive. After one particularly brutal incident, Jessica fled to another state to escape him, fearing further persecution. Despite this, she never reported him to the police. For the past year, Raymond had been in a romantic relationship with Jennifer Radko, a student at Yale University. Despite rumors of his infidelity with other students, graduate students, and lab employees, Jennifer accepted his marriage proposal and began wedding preparations. Although there is plenty of evidence of Raymond's guilt, but his motive for the crime remained unclear. He never revealed his motive, even after fully admitting his guilt. Initially, it was believed that the murder was caused by a workplace conflict. Raymond and Annie had been conducting experiments on lab mice to study the effectiveness of enzymes in treating cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. The mice were under Raymond's care, and he considered the lab his domain. He was a strict rule follower and often came into conflict with his co-workers, whom he would report to their superiors. On the day of the murder, Annie stayed late in the laboratory, entering an area where experimental animals were kept. Raymond, who may have already cleaned the area, also entered. There was then a possible confrontation between them, which eventually led to Annie being strangled in a fit of rage. An alternative theory suggests that Raymond had been trying to court Annie for a long time, but she had rejected him. This rejection made Raymond very angry, because he was someone who was not used to being rejected. When he learned of her upcoming wedding, Raymond became consumed by jealousy. The next day, he found himself alone with her in the laboratory and attacked her, attempting to rape her before strangling her. This theory could explain the emergence of seminal fluid on Annie's clothing, but it has never been proven conclusively. The case received widespread attention from the start, as the murder occurred on the campus of a prestigious university and the victim was a graduate student and a rising star in the sciences. The investigation was closely followed by the media. Notably, Raymond's ex-girlfriend, Jessica Del Rocco, participated in several interviews, where she openly discussed her past relationship with Raymond. Raymond's first court appearance was on October 6, 2009, in Connecticut. At this time, he denied any involvement in the murder and refuted the charges brought against him. The hearing was postponed several times to collect more evidence and documents related to the case. Investigations revealed that Raymond had been in the company of Annie in the laboratory for at least an hour, during which time Annie was brutally murdered. To hide his crimes, he used his key card over 50 times across various locations. Eventually, he reached the technical floor. Here, he spent approximately 15 minutes concealing the body Annie's within a wall. Shortly after, the fire alarm was triggered, which Raymond himself had activated. This allowed him to exit the building with the other staff members, thus he would avoid police suspicion. Another important clue is that in the pocket of the coat found under the false ceiling was a green ballpoint pen. This pen was later confirmed to be the same one Raymond used to sign various work logs on the day of the case. Additionally, witnesses observed Raymond meticulously scrubbing the lab floor in specific areas over the next few days, despite it appearing to be already clean. Furthermore, he disposed of all cleaning equipment, as well as a pack of tissues from the table with small brown stains resembling blood splatters. These items were later retrieved from a trash can, and forensic analysis confirmed that Raymond had made a thorough attempt to eliminate any traces of Annie's blood. In February 2011, Raymond agreed to a plea deal with the investigators. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would plead guilty. On March 17, 2011, at the next court hearing, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted rape. He also expressed remorse and apologized to the parents and fiancé of Annie. However, Raymond never disclosed the details of what happened on the evening of the crime. He also refused to explain why he committed the act. As a result, Raymond J. Clark III received a 44 years prison sentence. He is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in New Haven County, Connecticut, and is scheduled for release in September 2053. In an interview, the parents and fiancé of Annie stated that they consider the sentence fair, despite the fact that it will not bring back their daughter. The victim's mother, Vivian Van Loo, delivered a heartfelt speech during the sentencing. With tears in her eyes, she said that she would never be able to hug Annie again, can't hear her laugh, or have grandchildren again. Goodbye, Annie, the most precious gift God gave her.